Welcome back to e-biology class presented by Fatima Convent High School. We are going to continue further chapter 5, the fundamental unit of life. Just a quick recap of what we studied yesterday. How was cell discovered? Who discovered cell? We learned to prepare an onion peel mount and observe it under a compound microscope. We also understood that cell is the structural and functional unit of every living organisms. We took an account of what contribution different scientists gave regarding the cell. We studied cell theory. Then we studied how the variation in organisms occur due to shape, size and number of cells, and how the shape and size of a cell is related to the specific function they perform. We also understood how the cell undergoes division of labor to accomplish various organic and metabolic tasks which it carries out in the body of a living organism. So let us move further through the chapter and try to understand more about cell. What is a cell made up of and what is the structural organization of a cell? These are the two questions which we are going to understand further in this chapter. Now, we understood that a living organism is made up of cell. But what is this cell made up of? Let us see what this cell is made up of. We saw how above that the cell has special components called organelles. How is a cell organized? If we study a cell under a microscope, we would come across three features in almost all the cells. Which are the three features which we would come across? They are plasma membrane, nucleus and cytoplasm. All the activities inside the cell and interaction of cell with the environment are possible due to these features. So, we can say that cell is basically made up of plasma membrane, nucleus and cytoplasm. Furthermore, in the cytoplasm there are various organelles. Now let us see what is plasma membrane. Plasma membrane is also known as cell membrane. A membrane in biology is a term used for a boundary. Anything which is a boundary or around a cell is called as plasma membrane. So, it is the outermost covering of the cell that separates the content of the cell from its external environment. Now, what is the function of plasma membrane? What does it help the cell in? The plasma membrane allows or permits the entry and exit of some material in and out of the cell. It also prevents the movement of some other material. The cell membrane, therefore, is called a selective permeable membrane. This word is very important to understand. Selective permeable membrane. Selective means only which is selected or likely to be helpful is allowed inside the cell. Permeable means allows the passage of. So, plasma membrane is selective permeable membrane because it allows only the selected material which is required by the cell to enter inside the cell and only the selected material which is a waste inside the cell to move outside the cell. This is the reason why it is called as selective permeable membrane. How does the movement of substances take place into the cell? How do substances move out of the cell? These two are very important questions related to a cell. For that, we will have to study certain biochemical processes. These biochemical processes are diffusion, osmosis, and cytosis. Now, let us understand first what is diffusion. We have already studied diffusion in the previous chemistry chapter. This diffusion is something related to that, but here it is specified only about a cell because the diffusion is going to occur through a cell. Now, we know that a cell has to take in oxygen and give out carbon dioxide, or it has to take in water or give out water, or exchange certain important materials which our body needs. Now, the process of diffusion helps in this exchange. Some substances like carbon dioxide or oxygen can move across the cell membrane by the process of diffusion. We have studied the process of diffusion in earlier chapters. We saw that there is a spontaneous movement of substances from a region of higher concentration to a region of lower concentration. So, we can define diffusion as the spontaneous movement of substances from a region of higher concentration to a lower concentration. Now, this diffusion occurs by the difference in concentration without any external energy given to it. So, it is termed as passive diffusion or passive transport. All the substances in universe tend to come to an equilibrium, and so here the law of equilibrium is followed, and the substance from a region of higher concentration tries to move to a concentration area which is lower than the other one. So, this makes the movement of the substances easy. Now, let us see what happens with this carbon dioxide and oxygen. Something similar to this happens in the cell. When, for example, substances like carbon dioxide, which is a cellular waste and requires to be excreted out of the cell. Cellular waste is a substance which is not required by the cell and is produced during certain biochemical processes. Accumulates in a high concentration inside the cell. In the cell's external environment, the concentration of CO2 is low as compared to that inside the cell. As soon as there is a difference of concentration of CO2 inside and outside the cell, CO2 moves out of the cell from a region of higher concentration to a region of lower concentration outside the cell by the process of diffusion. Similarly, O2 enters the cell by the process of diffusion when the level of concentration of O2 inside the cell decreases. Thus, diffusion plays an important role in exchange of gases between the cell as well as the cell and its external environment. So, did you all understand how the exchange of gases takes place in each cell? By the process called diffusion. Now, we know that other material to be exchanged is water. Does water follow the law of diffusion? Yes. Water also obeys the law of diffusion. The movement of water molecules through such a selective permeable membrane is called as osmosis. The movement of water across the plasma membrane is also affected by the amount of substance dissolved in water. Thus, osmosis is the passage of water from a region of high water concentration through a semi-permeable membrane to a region of low water concentration. So, you can say that osmosis is something similar to diffusion, but here the exchange of water takes place from a region of higher concentration to a region of lower concentration. Now, we know that along with water, other minerals and other important nutrients are also transported in and out of the cell. How does this occur? Now, for that, we need to understand three important things related to a solution or osmosis, that is hypertonic, hypotonic, isotonic, and hypertonic. Now, what are these words? Now, we know that what will happen if we put an animal cell or a plant cell into a solution of sugar or salt in water? Some of the following things could happen. Now, if the medium surrounding the cell has a higher water concentration than the cell, meaning that the outside solution is very dilute, the cell will gain water by osmosis. Such a solution is called as hypotonic solution. You can use the word dilute for a hypotonic solution. So, when the cell is having higher concentration, that is outside the cell the water level is high and inside the cell the water level is low, that time the cell tends to gain the water inside because of the difference in concentration. For example, water molecules are free to pass across the cell membrane in both directions, but more water will come in the cell than will leave. The net overall result is that water enters the cell. The cell is likely to swell up. In the medium that has exactly the same water concentration as the cell, there will be no net movement of water across the cell membrane. Such a solution is called as isotonic solution. So, if the water concentration inside the cell and outside the cell is equal, it is called isotonic. Water crosses the cell membrane in both directions, but the amount going in and is in the same as the amount going out. So, there is no overall movement of water and the cell stays same size. If the medium has a lower concentration of water than the cell, meaning that it is a very concentrated solution, the cell will lose water by osmosis. Such a solution is known as hypertonic solution. Again, water crosses the cell membrane in both directions, but this time more water leaves the cell than enters it. Therefore, the cell will shrink. Thus, osmosis is a special case of diffusion. Through a selective permeable membrane. Now let us try to understand this with the help of an activity. Osmosis by an egg. Now we know that egg is a cell. Remove the shell of an egg by dissolving it in dilute hydrochloric acid. The shell is mostly calcium carbonate. The thin outer skin now encloses the egg, but put the egg in pure water and observe after 5 minutes. What do we observe? The egg swells up because water passes into it by osmosis, means it is a hypotonic solution and osmosis occurs. Place a similar deshelled egg in a concentrated salt solution and observe for 5 minutes. The egg shrinks. Why? Water passes out of the egg solution into the salt solution because the salt solution is more concentrated. So, did you see? In one it is hypotonic solution and other it is hypertonic solution. So, the other word which we can use for hypertonic is concentrated. We can perform the same activity using dried raisins or apricot. Most of you must have seen this or done this in your houses. Put dry raisin or apricot in plain water and leave them for some time. They will then place them into a concentrated solution of sugar or salt. You will observe the following. Each gains water and swells up when placed in pure water. However, when placed in concentrated solution, it loses water and consequently shrinks. So, always remember that in hypotonic solution, a cell swells, whereas in a hypertonic solution, a cell shrinks. Now, unicellular organisms also undergo a similar process because they are a single cell. Unicellular freshwater organisms and most plants tend to gain water through osmosis. Absorption of water by plant roots is also an example of osmosis. Thus, diffusion is important in exchange of gases and water in the life of a cell. In addition to this, the cell also obtains nutrition from its environment. Different molecules move in and out of the cell through a type of transport requiring energy in form of ATP. Earlier, I had mentioned that diffusion is a process in which it is passive transport, but here, because you need energy, it is an active transport. The plasma membrane is flexible, which is made up of organic molecules called lipids and proteins. So, what is plasma membrane made up of? It is made up of lipids and proteins. However, we can observe that the structure of plasma membrane only through an electron microscope. The flexibility of cell membrane also enables the cell to engulf in food and other material from its external environment. Such processes are known as endocytosis. Amoeba acquires its food through such processes. Endocytosis. Endo word means inside and cytosis means to destroy or to kill. So when amoeba, a unicellular organism, takes in its food and uses it or breaks it down into nutritive components, it is called as endocytosis. Opposite to endocytosis is exocytosis. Exocytosis is when the waste material or non-required material from the cell moves out and are destroyed. It is called as exocytosis. So, did you understand what is plasma membrane and what are different biological processes associated with the exchange of various material in the cell? So, For this video, we shall end here, and tomorrow we shall continue with the other parts of the cell in the next video.